The restaurant Got Nori was packed that night. The soft yellowish lights reflected off the polished wooden furniture, creating a cozy and sophisticated atmosphere. The background music, a gentle piano melody, filled the air as customers enjoyed their exquisite meals, absorbed in their own conversations. Among the tables, the young Jun-ho skillfully glided with a tray full of dishes, smiling discreetly at the customers, trying to hide the exhaustion of yet another long shift. He knew that working there was a rare opportunity. Got Nori was famous for its elegance and selective clientele. However, while serving a table near the window, something broke the tranquility of the place. A sharp sound of dishes clattering to the floor made all eyes turn immediately to the source of the noise. There, in the center of the restaurant, an elderly woman, Sukja, who had been dining alone, suddenly collapsed in her chair. Her hand trembled as she tried to reach her chest, as if something were choking her. Jun-ho froze for a second. The woman's face was pale, almost lifeless. The restaurant, previously filled with murmurs and laughter, plunged into an uncomfortable silence. Anxiety began to grow in Jun-ho's chest. He was not a doctor, but something inside him pushed him to act. "Help! Someone help!" shouted a young woman at another table, but no one moved. Everyone seemed paralyzed by surprise or simply too uncomfortable to intervene. Without hesitating any longer, Jun-ho dropped the tray on the floor and ran to Sukja. He saw her struggling to breathe, her chest rising and falling irregularly. The sound was agonizing, as if each breath was a lost battle. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" he asked, kneeling beside her. Her hand weakly gripped the sleeve of his uniform, her eyes expressing a silent plea for help. Jun-ho knew he needed to act quickly. He tried to remember the first aid instructions he had learned years ago, but the pressure of the situation made everything confusing. "Breathe with me, slowly," he whispered, unsure if she could hear him. He began to guide her movements, hoping it would help stabilize her breathing. The people around began to whisper, some pulling out their cell phones, others merely watching, frozen. Jun-ho felt the weight of their stares, but he could not afford to care about that now. The woman in front of him was on the verge of complete collapse, and he was the only person doing something. "Has anyone called for emergency services?" he shouted without turning, still focused on Sukja. A voice behind him replied that an ambulance was on the way, but Jun-ho knew that every second counted. Finally, her breathing began to stabilize slightly, but her condition was still critical. He held her hand firmly, trying to convey some form of comfort. "You're going to be okay," he said softly, despite not being sure if it was true. As he kept his focus on helping Sukja, the sound of quick, firm footsteps echoed through the restaurant. It was Seung-min, the manager. His face was red with anger, clearly annoyed by the chaos the scene had caused. He completely ignored the woman in distress and instead focused on Jun-ho with a hard expression. "What are you doing?" Seung-min demanded, his voice low and full of rage. "You're scaring the customers! Get her out of here, now!" Jun-ho was incredulous at what he had just heard. "Sir, she is having an emergency. We can't move her like that." He spoke calmly, but there was a rising tension in his voice. How could Seung-min be so insensitive at a moment like this? Seung-min crossed his arms, his face as hard as stone. "That's not our problem. Take her to the back and wait for the ambulance there, away from the customers, now." Jun-ho pressed his lips together, frustrated, but tried to maintain his composure. Moving her could worsen her condition, sir. She needs air, space, and the ambulance is already on the way. I won't repeat myself, Junho, Seungmin growled. The silence in the restaurant felt thicker, as if every customer was waiting for the outcome of that argument. But Junho knew he was right. He could not yield to that absurd order. Sukja's life was worth more than any embarrassment or appearance the restaurant might maintain. I'm not going to move her, he said firmly. The two stared at each other for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. Seungmin, irritated, stepped back, momentarily giving up. However, Junho knew this would not go without consequences. Soon, the sound of ambulance sirens filled the air. When the paramedics entered, Junho stepped back, allowing them to do their job. He watched as Sukja was carefully taken out of the restaurant, feeling a temporary relief. But deep down, he knew the real storm was yet to come. As the restaurant door closed behind the ambulance, the atmosphere returned to a kind of uncomfortable normalcy. Conversations gradually reignited, but there was something different in the air, a subtle tension that lingered over everyone present. Junho stood still for a moment, trying to calm the heart that was still racing in his chest. He had done what he believed was right, but Seungmin's gaze weighed on his back like a constant reminder that the price of that decision was still to come. Junho, Seungmin's voice sounded again, this time colder, calculated. He was by the entrance to the kitchen, arms crossed, and a look of pure irritation on his face. We need to talk, now. With no other option, Junho followed the manager, feeling the curious stares of customers and colleagues on him. They entered the kitchen, where the clattering of dishes and the steam from the pots created a chaotic contrast with the tense silence that filled the dining room. Seungmin led him to the small office in the back, shutting the door behind him with a bang. Inside, the muffled sounds from the kitchen were replaced by the heavy breathing of the manager, who was clearly struggling to control himself. I don't know what you were thinking, Seungmin began, his voice low and heavy with anger. But you just put the restaurant in a difficult position. This is unacceptable. Junho maintained a firm posture, but inside, his nervousness was starting to take over. He knew this conversation wouldn't end well. Sir, I did what was necessary. She was on the verge of collapse, and moving her could have killed her. Seungmin slammed his hand on the table, causing Junho to jump slightly. That doesn't matter. What matters is that you ignored a direct order, and now the restaurant is in an uncomfortable situation. Do you think customers enjoy seeing scenes like that while they are dining? We offer a calm, sophisticated experience, and you broke that. The silence that followed was suffocating. Junho took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He knew Seungmin was worried about the restaurant's reputation, but the coldness with which he treated the incident left him outraged. He thought of the woman, Sukja, still fighting for her life in an ambulance, while Seungmin only cared about appearances. If it were your mother, Seungmin, would you want someone to move her to the back while she struggled to breathe? The words came out before he could hold them back, and the silence that followed was even heavier. Seungmin narrowed his eyes, the muscles in his jaw tightening. That's irrelevant. The fact is that you disobeyed me, and for that, you're out. The statement hit like a blow. What? Junho stammered, incredulous. You're firing me because I saved a life? Seungmin crossed his arms again, his gaze fixed and determined. This isn't a discussion. What you did was irresponsible. I need someone who follows orders, especially in critical moments like that. For a moment, the world around Junho seemed to compress, as if everything were getting smaller, more suffocating. He knew his job there was important. The salary supported his family, paid for his studies. But at the same time, there was something within him that refused to accept that injustice. "I'm not going to apologize for doing what was right," Junho said, his voice firmer than he expected. "If you think following orders is more important than saving a life, then maybe I really shouldn't be here." Seung-min stared at him for a few seconds, clearly surprised by the response. He hadn't expected resistance. Junho knew he was about to cross a line of no return, but somehow it brought him a sense of peace. His mind cleared, and the weight that had been in his chest since the incident began to dissipate. "You're fired," Seung-min repeated, this time without the need to raise his voice. "Grab your things and get out of here before I change my mind about how this will end." Junho said nothing more. He simply turned, leaving the small, stuffy office, feeling a mix of relief and uncertainty. He crossed the kitchen amidst the curious gazes of his colleagues, not knowing what the future held for him. Deep down, he felt a sharp pain at leaving that job behind, but he knew he couldn't stay in a place where principles like compassion and integrity were secondary. When he reached the locker room, he grabbed his backpack and quickly changed clothes, trying to process what had just happened. The thought of going home and telling his mother that he had lost his job terrified him. They depended on that money, and he had no contingency plan. As he walked out the back door, the cold night air embraced him with an uncomfortable hug. He looked up at the cloudy sky, feeling the first drops of an impending rain. But as much as uncertainty surrounded him, there was something within Junho that told him he had done the right thing. A person's life was worth more than any job, and as painful as it was, he had no regrets. However, as he walked away from the restaurant for the last time, a persistent thought nagged at him. What would happen to Sukja? Would she be okay? That doubt gnawed at him inside, but at the same time, he knew there was more at stake. And somehow, he felt that that night would change his life in ways he couldn't yet foresee. The sound of raindrops hitting the ground began to increase, turning into a torrent as Junho walked through the wet streets of Seoul. Each step he took seemed to echo the confusion and fear that crowded his mind. The world around him seemed darker than usual, as if the vibrant lights of the city had been overshadowed by his inner turmoil. He pulled the hood of his jacket up, trying to shield himself from the rain that was now falling heavily. His phone vibrated in his pocket, but he knew who it was. His mother, probably asking why he hadn't come home yet. The thought of answering and delivering the news was too frightening for the moment, so he decided to ignore the call. He needed time to process everything that had happened. In his mind, the events of the day spun around endlessly. The image of Sukja, fragile and struggling to breathe, was etched in his memory. Just like Seung-min's judgmental gaze, the weight of the dismissal was a harsh reality. But what troubled him more was the fact that he had done the right thing and still paid too high a price for it. The sound of the rain muffled the noises of the city, creating a sort of bubble around him. It was a cold and desolate night, perfectly matching what Junho felt inside. The streets were nearly deserted, With only a few passers-by rushing to take shelter from the storm, he walked aimlessly, trying to find answers, a solution, or at least some sign of what he should do next. The resignation was just the beginning of a series of questions. How would he explain this to his mother, who was already sick and depended on that job to cover the costs of her treatment? How would he continue his studies without the salary that helped pay his tuition? Thinking about all this at once was overwhelming. As these questions haunted him, he felt his phone vibrate again. This time, a text message appeared on the screen. "I hope you're satisfied with what you did." It was from Seung-min. Junho closed his eyes for a second, trying to control the mix of anger and frustration that flooded his body. He took a deep breath and put the phone back in his pocket, ignoring the provocation. It no longer mattered. Their relationship had come to an end, and any attempt to respond would only prolong the weariness. After wandering aimlessly for a few more minutes, he found a small shelter in a park and decided to sit for a while. The rain pounded heavily against the metal structure above his head, and the cold air made his fingers tremble slightly. He curled up on the bench, trying to protect himself, but also feeling that this moment of solitude was necessary to organize his thoughts. His mind returned to that woman, Suk-ja. Who was she? What had happened for her to faint like that? Junho had never seen her before in the restaurant, and that left him curious. There was something about that situation that seemed deeper than just a simple malaise. The urgency with which she was attended to, the pallor in her face. Something was not right. It was then that his phone vibrated again, but this time it wasn't a message from Seung-min or his mother. It was a news notification. Not knowing exactly why, he unlocked his phone and saw the headline: "Woman collapses in restaurant in Seoul. Customer hospitalized in serious condition." His heart raced as he read the title. He quickly clicked on the link and was taken to a short article detailing the incident. The text was brief but mentioned that the woman had been identified as Suk-ja, a businesswoman from the city, and that her health condition was still critical. Suk-ja. Junho couldn't help but feel a wave of guilt. He had done what he could, but was it enough? And why was such an important businesswoman in a simple place like that, alone, with no one to help her? The article didn't reveal much more, but mentioned that her hospitalization was attracting attention since her company was apparently one of the most influential in technology and export sectors in South Korea. Junho was stunned. Who could have imagined that the woman he helped was someone of such importance? Before he could process everything, his phone vibrated again. This time, it was an unknown number. For a moment he hesitated, but something inside him urged him to answer. "Hello?" he said, his voice laden with suspicion. "Junho?" The voice on the other end was deep but calm. "My name is Kang Woo-jin. I am Suk-ja's lawyer. She is conscious now, and one of the first things she asked for was to speak with you." Junho froze. "Me? But why?" Woo-jin paused before responding. "She believes you saved her life, and she wants to thank you in person." Junho's world stopped for an instant. He didn't know what to say or how to react to that news. But suddenly, the darkness of that night seemed a little less oppressive. Perhaps in the midst of all that storm, there was a path to redemption. Kang Woo-jin's words echoed in Junho's mind as he continued sitting under the small shelter in the park. The rain was still pouring down, But suddenly everything felt more distant. Sukja's lawyer had reached out to him personally, and she wanted to thank him. He could hardly believe it. What had started as a day of chaos and unexpected losses was, surprisingly, taking a completely new turn. I don't know what to say, Junho stammered, his voice choked with confusion and surprise. You don't need to say anything right now, Woojin said, in a calm, almost paternal tone. I understand you must be surprised, but Sukja really insists on seeing you. I can arrange everything for a visit to the hospital, if you are available. Junho hesitated. Questions flooded his mind. What did she really want with him? Why was someone like Sukja, a powerful businesswoman, so determined to see him? He was just a common young man, recently fired from a restaurant. However, there was something about that request that piqued his curiosity. A part of him wanted to know more, to understand what was happening behind the scenes with that enigmatic woman. Yes, of course, he replied, finally surrendering to curiosity. I can go. When would it be? Great, Woojin replied efficiently. Tomorrow morning around 10 a.m. at Seoul University Hospital. I will leave your name at the reception so you can enter without difficulties. I will be there, Junho said, still dazed by the sudden turn of events. When the call ended, he put the phone back in his pocket and spent some time watching the rain. His heart was restless, but in a different way than before. Now, he felt something new, a mix of curiosity and anxiety. The storm raging in the sky seemed a reflection of the turmoil he faced internally. At the same time, a small spark of hope began to illuminate his mind, even though he didn't quite know where it was coming from. The next morning, Junho woke up to the soft sound of his mother preparing breakfast. The familiar aroma of rice and miso soup filled the house, bringing a comfort he hadn't even realized he needed. He got up slowly, still feeling the weight of the previous night on his shoulders. But now there was a clear mission ahead. His mother, Kim Yoon-ha, looked at him with worried eyes as soon as he entered the kitchen. You came home late last night, Junho. Is everything all right? He sighed, trying not to show the internal struggles he was facing. I just needed some time to think, Mom. But everything is under control. She nodded, but her gaze showed that she wasn't completely convinced. You know you can talk to me, right? I know. Thank you, he said, sitting down to have breakfast. I have some important things to take care of today. I need to leave early. Yoon-ha smiled, but didn't ask anything more, leaving him with his thoughts as he quickly finished eating. He put on simple but appropriate clothes, and as he left, he cast one last look at the house. Somehow, he felt that this day would be different, that something was about to change. And he was right. Upon arriving at Seoul University Hospital, Junho was met by a receptionist who, upon hearing his name, immediately directed him to the floor where Sukja was hospitalized. As he rode the elevator, his heart raced. He didn't know what to expect. When the doors opened, Kang Woo-jin was waiting for him at the entrance of the hallway. The lawyer was a tall man with an impassive expression, and he extended his hand in a friendly but professional gesture. Junho, right? Nice to meet you, he said with a restrained smile. Come on, she's waiting for you. The two walked in silence through the hospital's white corridors, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the cold walls. Junho's anxiety grew with each step, and he tried to suppress the questions that arose in his mind. Woojin guided him to a discreet wooden door and stopped in front of it. I'll leave you here. She's awake and very eager to see you." "Take your time," Wu Jin said, waving slightly before walking down the hallway. Junho took a deep breath, his heart racing. He hesitated for a second before gently knocking on the door and pushing it open. Inside, the room was simple, with soft light illuminating the light-colored walls, and lying in bed was Sukja. She looked pale and fragile, but her eyes shone intensely as they turned to him. A small smile appeared on her lips as she slightly lifted her head to greet him. "You came," she said in a low voice, but filled with gratitude. "Thank you for this." Junho approached, unsure of what to say. He felt a mix of discomfort and compassion. I'm glad you're better. When I saw you that day, I thought something terrible had happened." Sukja gave a weak smile, but her expression didn't lose its strength. "It was something terrible, but you were there to help me. And for that, I feel I owe you an explanation." She paused, taking a deep breath, as if she was about to reveal something important. "The truth, Junho, is that what happened to me was not an accident. There is something much bigger at play, and you, as strange as it may seem, could be the key to solving it." Junho froze. Sukja's words hung in the air, heavy with a truth he could barely process. "It wasn't an accident?" he repeated, incredulity dripping from his voice. His heart raced, and he felt the need to sit down, but forced himself to remain standing out of respect for the woman before him. Sukja, still weak, gestured with her hand for him to sit beside the bed. "Please, Junho, sit down. What I have to say goes beyond what you imagine, and it's important that you listen to everything calmly." Complying, he dragged a nearby chair and sat down, his restless hands resting on his knees. She watched him for a moment, as if weighing her next words carefully. Her face, though physically fragile, was marked by unwavering determination. "You saved my life, Junho," she began, her voice soft but firm. "But I was in danger long before you found me in that alley. What happened to me was an attempt to silence someone who knows too much." Junho frowned. "Knows too much? What are you talking about? And what does this have to do with me?" Sukja took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving Junho's. "I lead a powerful company, as you must know. But what few know is that within our business, there are secret, illegal operations. They involve information trafficking and even bribery at levels you can't even imagine." Junho's heart leaped. He wasn't prepared to hear something so heavy. His mind raced back to the moment he found her, bloodied, on the cold, damp floor. Now, everything made sense. The assault, the urgency. It hadn't been a coincidence. But why him? Why was she telling him this? I don't understand," he stammered. "Why tell me all this? I'm just a cook." Sukja let out a soft laugh, but soon coughed, her frail body showing signs of the recent attack. "You are more than a cook, Junho, and that's exactly why I'm telling you this. There's something in you, something I saw that day. A determination, a strength, a purity that is rare. The kind of person who doesn't get easily corrupted." He shook his head, incredulous. "That doesn't make sense. I just did what anyone would do." "No," she retorted, her eyes intense. "Most people would have run away, but you stayed. You saved a life you didn't even know, and now you need to know the truth." Junho felt the weight of responsibility closing in on him, pushing him into unknown territory. Part of him wanted to stand up and leave that room, to distance himself from such a dangerous and complex plot. But another part, stronger, was caught up in the intrigue, in the feeling that fate was leading him to something greater, something he could not ignore. I still don't understand where I fit into this. What do you expect me to do? Sukja closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. I need your help to dismantle this network of corruption. I need someone from the outside, someone who isn't involved and can act without raising suspicion. And before you ask why I trust you, I'll tell you, it's because in that alley, you gave me a second chance at life. Now, I give you the choice to help me fix what's wrong. Junho fell silent, his body rigid in the chair. It was an absurd offer, a request that didn't seem to make sense. How could he, a young man without powerful connections or experience in such matters, help? It all sounded like a conspiracy worthy of movies, not his ordinary life. I don't know if I can, he began, feeling the weight of the responsibility being placed on his shoulders. This is too big. I'm just an ordinary person. Sometimes, Sukja replied, her eyes shining with determination. It's the most ordinary person who can make the biggest difference. And I'm not asking you to do this alone. I have allies, people who can guide you, but I need you to act because no one will suspect you. It's the only way. Silence fell between them again as Junho processed everything. The offer was tempting, but dangerous. He could hardly imagine what he was getting into. Yet the spark in Sukja's eyes was undeniable. She was fighting for her life and for something greater, and somehow he felt he couldn't just turn his back. I'll think about it, he finally said, his voice lower than he intended. This is a lot. Sukja nodded, understanding. I know it's a difficult request, Junho, but I just want you to think. If you decide to help me, I will do everything in my power to ensure your safety and that of your family. If not, you can continue with your life, and I won't force you into anything. Junho slowly stood up, his thoughts confused. Thank you for telling me all this. I need time. Take as much time as you need, Sukja replied with a faint but tired smile. But remember, time is something that for me may be running out. He waved goodbye, not knowing what else to say, and left the room, his head spinning with the avalanche of information. As he walked through the hospital corridors, the sound of his footsteps echoed in his mind along with Sukja's words. Junho knew his life would never be the same. The days that followed were a storm in Junho's mind. Every move he made, every word he heard, seemed loaded with an invisible weight. In the restaurant, where he usually felt at ease, with his hands busy in the pots and the heat of the kitchen around him, everything now felt like a meaningless distraction. Sukja's request resonated in his head like an endless echo, dragging with it the feeling that he was about to enter a world he had never imagined. At home, sitting on the small sofa in his living room, he tried to think clearly, but the tension increased with every passing minute. He knew he was at a dead end. If he did nothing, the corrupt network that Sukja had mentioned would continue to operate with impunity, and she might pay the highest price. But if he agreed to get involved, he would be entering a dangerous game, where his chances of coming out unscathed seemed minimal. It was late at night when Junho, finally exhausted from his own doubts, picked up the phone. The number Sukja had given him was saved in his contacts, and his fingers hesitated over the name. It was so easy to press the button and rid himself of all that anguish. so easy to ignore and go on with his peaceful life. But he couldn't. A part of him, perhaps the same part that made him stop that night in the alley, pushed him to act. Before he could rationalize, his fingers touched the call icon. The phone rang 3 times before a firm male voice answered. "Yes, I'm Jun-ho. Sukja gave me this number." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, as if the person was pondering what to do next. "Understood. We will be waiting for you tomorrow at 9 a.m. at the cafe next to the hospital. Don't be late." The call ended before Jun-ho could respond. He stared at the phone in his hand, his heart racing. There was no turning back now. The decision was made. The next morning, he woke up early, his nerves on edge. He put on simple clothes that would give him some confidence and left home with newfound determination, trying to ignore the knot in his stomach. The walk to the cafe felt longer than usual, as if the buildings and streets were stretched by the weight of what was to come. Upon arrival, Jun-ho entered the small cafe and looked around. It was a modest place, with the strong smell of coffee hanging in the air. The tables were scattered haphazardly, and only a few customers occupied the space. In the back, 2 men were sitting, their cold, calculating gazes fixed on Jun-ho as soon as he crossed the door. He approached cautiously, feeling their eyes evaluating him from head to toe. "Jun-ho?" asked the taller man, his voice deep and authoritative. Jun-ho nodded. "Sit!" ordered the other man, a bit shorter, but equally intimidating. His eyes were sharp, and he watched Jun-ho's every move as if reading his soul. He obeyed, trying not to show the nervousness burning inside him. "So, you accepted Sukja's request?" asked the first man, crossing his arms while tilting his head slightly to the side. "You know this isn't a game, right?" Jun-ho took a deep breath, maintaining a steady gaze. "I know it's not a game, but I couldn't just ignore what's happening. If she's in danger because of something so big, I can't turn my back." The second man, who had been silent until then, let out a slight smile, as if he was pleased with the answer. "Sukja has good judgment. It seems she was right about you. But before we move forward, you need to understand what's at stake." The first man opened a folder that was beside him on the table and took out some documents. He placed them on the table, pushing them towards Jun-ho. "This is just a sample of what we're dealing with. Companies involved in money laundering, influence peddling, and corruption at high levels of government. Sukja discovered too much, and now they want to silence her permanently. If you really want to help, you'll need to infiltrate this world without being detected. It's going to be dangerous." Jun-ho looked at the documents, the words jumbling as the gravity of the situation weighed down on him. "What exactly do you want me to do?" The sharp-eyed man leaned forward, his voice low and serious. "We need someone who won't raise suspicion, someone who can approach certain individuals without alarming them. You, Jun-ho, are perfect for this. No one will ever suspect a cook, an ordinary man." The pressure on his shoulders increased. It was clear that this would be more than he had ever faced in his life, but the possibility of turning back no longer seemed an option. There was something bigger at stake now, something that involved more than just him. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said, his voice sounding firmer than he felt inside. "But I will need guidance." "You'll have what you need," replied the taller man, standing up and extending his hand to Jun-ho. "My name is Dae-hyun. I will be your point of contact from now on." Jun-ho shook Dae-hyun's hand, feeling the weight of his final decision. "And I am Hwan," said the other man, giving a slight nod. We will guide you, but the risk is yours. From now on, everything you do could put you on their radar. Don't underestimate the danger." Junho nodded. He knew he was stepping into a dangerous game, but something inside him, something deep, was ready for the challenge. As he left the cafeteria, Junho looked at the overcast sky and felt the cold morning wind brush against his face. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. His life was about to change forever. The following days were a whirlwind. Junho felt as if he had been pulled into a maelstrom, and now there was no way out. Dae-hyun and Hwan kept him moving, passing along information, coordinating discreet meetings, and preparing him for what was to come. The tension in the air was palpable, and Junho knew that every wrong step could mean his destruction. That late afternoon, he found himself in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Dae-hyun was by his side, adjusting the electronic device that Junho would use during the first phase of his infiltration. It was strange to see the contrast between the two. Dae-hyun, cold and calculating, moving with precision. Junho, restless, feeling his heart pounding against his chest. This is the first real test, Junho. We will monitor you, but you will be on your own. From now on, you are just another piece on their board. Understood? Dae-hyun adjusted the earpiece in Junho's ear as he spoke, his eyes searching for any spark of hesitation. Junho nodded, although part of him wanted to run away. Understood. What do I need to do? There's a man named Ji-seok. He is one of the right-hand men of a front company that launders money for corrupt politicians. Tonight, he will be at an informal gathering at a private club downtown. You go there, blend in, and gain his trust. He likes gambling and is suspicious of anyone who doesn't share that interest. Win his favor. Gambling? That's not exactly my strong suit, Junho commented, somewhat uncomfortable. That's why we're here. Hwan, who had been silent until then, stepped closer. We have some information about his preferences. He likes poker. Our luck is that he's not a skilled player, but he likes to control the environment. Show yourself as a friendly opponent, but without looking too weak. The important thing is to make him feel like he is in control. Junho took a deep breath. Right. And what if things don't go as planned? Hwan shrugged, his expression impassive. Then you improvise. There was no more time for doubts. Shortly after, Junho found himself in front of the indicated club. The place exuded exclusivity. The soft lights and the doorman at the entrance made it clear that only those with connections or money could enter. Fortunately, he had the right words. With a brief mention of Ji-seok's name, the doorman let him pass, and Junho stepped into the luxurious gaming hall. The atmosphere was suffocating. The sound of clinking glasses, muffled laughter, and the discreet sound of poker chips mingled with the heavy air of cigarettes. The light was dim, and the expensive aroma of whiskey filled the room. In the back, he spotted Ji-seok, surrounded by other men at a poker table, laughing at something that had just happened. He was exactly as Dae-hyun had described, confident, well-dressed, but with a glimmer of arrogance in his eyes. Junho walked up to the table, his heart racing, but trying to maintain his composure. "Can I join you?" he asked, with a slight smile on his face. Ji-seok looked him up and down, his eyes half closed, as he assessed the newcomer. "Feeling lucky today?" he asked, his voice laced with provocation. Jun-ho shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. Luck is unpredictable, but I enjoy a good challenge. That seemed to please Ji-seok, who nodded. Take a seat. Let's see what you've got. The tension at the table was almost palpable. Jun-ho sat down, the chips in front of him, and tried to remember everything he had learned in the past few hours. He didn't need to be the best player at the table. He just had to keep Ji-seok interested. As the rounds progressed, Jun-ho played cautiously, allowing Ji-seok to win a few hands without ever seeming too incompetent. The night went on, and gradually, Ji-seok began to relax. He drank more, laughed more easily, and the initial suspicion seemed to be fading. "You don't play as badly as I thought," he commented, pulling a stack of chips toward him. Jun-ho chuckled softly. "I just keep myself out of trouble." Ji-seok looked at him for a moment, his eyes assessing, and then leaned forward. "So why are you here? You don't seem like the type who frequents this place." The moment of truth had arrived. Jun-ho took a deep breath, keeping his gaze steady. "I heard you have good connections, and I'm looking for an opportunity, something to take me out of the ordinary life." Ji-seok smiled, visibly pleased. "Ah, I see. Ordinary life can be boring. I know how it is. But if you want to enter this world, you need to prove you can handle complicated situations." "I'm willing to do that," Jun-ho replied, trying to sound convincing, even with fear gnawing at his stomach. "Great," Ji-seok smiled again, this time more predatorily. "Maybe we can find something for you. But first, I need to know how far you're willing to go." Jun-ho knew this was just the beginning. The test was far from over, and now he was more involved than he had ever imagined. However, the small victory at that poker table was a sign that he was on the right track. If he wanted to protect Sukja and expose the truth, he would have to keep playing this dangerous game, always on the edge of the abyss. The sun had yet to rise when Jun-ho left the club, adrenaline surging through his body. He had managed to gain Ji-seok's trust, but that victory also brought a new reality. What else would be required of him? Hwan and Dae-hyun were waiting for him at a nearby cafe, and the expectation in their gazes made him feel a bit more secure. As soon as he sat down, Jun-ho felt a mix of relief and nervousness. "I managed to get in good with Ji-seok. He's interested, but I feel like he wants more than just a casual business conversation," he reported, while Hwan jotted something down in a notebook. Dae-hyun looked at him, a slight smile of approval on his face. "Good job, Jun-ho. Now, we need you to convince him to bring you closer to the operation. He should have some idea of what's happening behind the scenes." "Yes, but what is expected of me? What do I need to do now?" Jun-ho asked, seeking clarity. Hwan replied, his expression serious. "You need to find a way to gather information about Ji-seok's business activities. He'll likely make a reference to money laundering or something related to politics. Opportunities will arise when you least expect them. So be careful. And remember, don't forget about us. The earpiece is always active. As soon as you have something relevant, it's crucial that you let us know." With those words, Jun-ho felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Through Ji-seok, he could uncover everything, but that meant delving even deeper into the underworld. What he was about to get involved in could be darker and deeper than anything he had ever imagined. In the days that followed, Jun-ho dedicated himself to maintaining the relationship with Ji-seok. They met frequently, and he gradually inserted himself into the man's social circle. Junho learned about the games, the lies surrounding them, and how men like Ji-seok manipulated everything around them. During one of these meetings, he finally had the opportunity he was waiting for. It was a cold night, and Junho and Ji-seok were at a high-end bar surrounded by other businessmen. The laughter and upbeat music contrasted with the tense atmosphere Junho felt. After a few rounds of drinks and some hands of poker, Ji-seok turned to him with a confident expression. "You've got potential, kid. You're not like the others who come around here. It seems you really have what it takes." Junho smiled, knowing this was the right moment. "I appreciate the compliment. I'm trying to make a name for myself in this world, but I don't have much to offer besides my willingness to work hard." Ji-seok raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Working hard is great, but sometimes you need to do something more. Have you ever wondered how these people are making money here?" Junho hesitated, but managed to keep his composure. "I guess that's part of the game. But there's always a dark side, right?" "Exactly," Ji-seok exclaimed, leaning forward, his eyes shining with a mischievous passion. "You know that the power game isn't just about cards, right? It's about influence, control, politics, business. Everything is interconnected. Do you want to know more about what really happens behind the curtains?" Junho's heart raced. "Yes, I'm curious, and there's a growing interest from the people who are in control." Ji-seok let out a low laugh, a shrewd glint in his eyes. "If you want to learn, you need to be willing to take risks. In fact, there's a meeting happening tomorrow night where the city's most powerful minds will be present. Come with me. I believe you'll enjoy yourself." Junho was surprised by the invitation. An event like this could give him access to information he never thought was possible. "Of course, I would love to." The hours that followed were a mix of excitement and anxiety. He had gained unprecedented access to Ji-seok's world, but that also meant the lines between what was right and what was wrong were blurring. Junho knew he had to be careful, but the idea of uncovering hidden truths drove him forward. That night, Junho dressed carefully, choosing a dark shirt that matched the elegant blazer he had bought for this new life. Upon entering the meeting venue, what he saw made his stomach churn. The room was filled with familiar faces, politicians, businessmen, and shady figures, all talking, laughing, and making deals in the shadows. Ji-seok soon spotted him and gestured for him to join. "Here you are. Now you will see true power in action." Ji-seok's gaze was filled with pride and a hint of mischief. The atmosphere was electrically tense, and Junho felt like a fly in a spider's web. He heard fragments of conversations, noticed subtle gestures, and observed how alliances were formed and broken with a wave of the hand. But what impressed him most was how the world of crime was intertwined with political power. He realized that corruption was not just a matter of money. It was a game of ego, control, and influence. "Are you understanding everything, kid?" Ji-seok asked with a knowing smile. "Here, anything is possible. And if you're smart, you can gain a lot." Junho nodded, but his mind was a whirlwind. He needed to gather information, but he also had to be careful not to become a target. The world was more complex than he had imagined, and now he was at the center of it all. The atmosphere in the room was charged, a mix of tension and euphoria that Junho had never experienced before. As Ji-seok introduced him to various influential figures, Junho struggled to absorb every word, every glance, aware that each interaction could hold secrets he needed to unravel. What was at stake here was much greater than he had thought. The line between right and wrong, between good and evil, was beginning to fade. "Junho, this is Mr. Min," Ji-seok said, pointing to a sturdy man with a shrewd look. "He is one of the most powerful men in the city and has deep knowledge about the operations that happen beneath the surface." Junho greeted Mr. Min, noticing how his eyes evaluated every detail, as if he were assessing how valuable Junho could be for his plans. "I've heard a lot about you," Junho said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Ji-seok spoke about your work." Mr. Min smiled, but there was something cold in his gaze. "Thank you. What you really need to know, Junho, is that in this world, power is not just about who you know, but about what you can do with those connections." As Junho absorbed the words, a group of men entered the room, bringing a new wave of murmurs. They had a dominant presence, and Junho quickly realized they were high-ranking figures, the elite of the underworld. "These are the lords of drugs and gambling," Ji-seok whispered beside him. "Be careful what you say to them." The leader of the group, a tall man with visible tattoos under his silk shirt, began to speak. "The city is changing, and we need to ensure our businesses continue to thrive. Corruption is the foundation of everything, and if you're not willing to play the game, you'll be left out." Junho exchanged nervous glances with Ji-seok. The weight of the situation hit him. He was about to be pulled into a world he had never desired, but the desire to uncover the truth and expose the injustices pushed him forward. As the night progressed, Junho found himself talking to a woman with long dark hair named Soo-jin. She was an assistant to one of the most influential men in the room. "What do you really want here, Junho?" she asked, her keen gaze stripping away his facade. He hesitated, knowing that his answer could put him at risk. "I'm just trying to understand what really happens in this city." Soo-jin smiled, but it was a sad smile. Many enter this world thinking they can control what is around them, but soon realize they are being controlled. "Take care, Junho. Not everything is as it seems." Her words echoed in his mind. He needed to be cautious, but the adrenaline rush and the quest for truth were irresistible. As the party continued, he began to hear conversations about a new operation, something that could be a major coup for the city. "The suppliers are ramping up production," a burly man said, his hoarse voice resonating in the room. "We need a safe place to store. Money is flowing, and we can't let anything interfere with that." Junho immediately turned to Ji-seok, who was engrossed in conversation. He approached him and whispered, "We need to find out more about this. It could be our chance to reveal what is going on." "Yes, but don't do anything rash," Ji-seok warned. "We have to know who else is involved. The last thing you want is to cross someone on the wrong side." As the party reached its climax, Junho felt the weight of expectation. He had been thrust into a world where truth was obscured by lies and corruption. And while the idea of exposing it all was tempting, the line between friend and foe was becoming increasingly thin. When the event came to an end, Ji-seok gestured for Junho, and the two stepped out into the cool night air. "You did well, kid. Now you're officially in our circle." Junho smiled, but the feeling of euphoria was soon replaced by doubt. What did this really mean? Was he prepared for the challenges to come, and what would be the cost of these new connections? Ji-seok said, his tone serious. You need to start preparing. From now on, your life will never be the same. Those words hung in the air as Jun-ho looked out at the illuminated city, a world of promises and dangers waiting for him. The journey had just begun, and he was about to discover that the truth could be darker than he had imagined. The cold night breeze brushed against Jun-ho's face as he and Ji-seok walked through the bustling streets of Seoul, the vibrant city that never slept. But even with the excitement around him, he felt a cloud of uncertainty looming over him. The world he had entered, filled with power and corruption, seemed more dangerous with each passing moment. We need to act quickly, Ji-seok said, interrupting Jun-ho's thoughts. The operation we heard about could be a big score, but it could also be a poison. If something goes wrong, we may be the first to suffer the consequences. I understand, Jun-ho replied, his heart racing. But how are we going to infiltrate this scheme? We need concrete information, something that can give us an edge. Ji-seok stopped, his gaze fixed on a distant point. The first thing we need to do is find out who is behind this. Mr. Min could be a valuable ally, but he is also fickle. What we need is an informant who knows the details, and I know someone. Who? Jun-ho asked, curiosity blooming in his mind. A woman named Hae-jin. She worked for the local mafia and has information that could help us. However, she is not easy to find. She lives in the shadows, away from curious eyes, Ji-seok explained, his eyes shining with determination. But if we can convince her to help us, we might have the chance to expose this operation. The plan seemed risky, but the possibility of shedding light on the corruption haunting the city was stronger than the fear Jun-ho felt. Where can we find her? He asked, eager to take action. She frequents a bar downtown, a place where the discontent gather and hidden truths are whispered. But remember, Hae-jin doesn't trust easily. We need to present a good argument, Ji-seok replied. Hours later, the two men entered the smoky bar, the smell of alcohol and cigarettes hanging in the dense air. The lights were dim, creating an intimidating and claustrophobic atmosphere. Jun-ho felt his stomach churn as he noticed the faces around him, many marked by hard lives and questionable decisions. There, Ji-seok murmured, pointing to a woman sitting in a corner, surrounded by a group of burly men. Hae-jin had an aura of mystery that drew attention, even though her expression remained cold and calculated. Her dark eyes scrutinized every movement. How are we going to approach her? Jun-ho asked, nervous. Let me handle this. Follow my lead, Ji-seok replied, adjusting his tie and stepping toward the group. As Ji-seok approached, Jun-ho stayed behind, observing. The exchanged words were brief, and soon Ji-seok gestured for Jun-ho to join them. With a racing heart, he walked toward the table, feeling Hae-jin's penetrating gaze on his skin. This is Hae-jin, Ji-seok said, with a gentle smile. And I am Ji-seok. And you are? Jun-ho, he replied, trying to maintain his composure. What are you doing here, Hae-jin? Hae-jin raised an eyebrow, her expression becoming even more enigmatic. You look different. You're not the type to frequent this place. I'm here out of necessity. I heard you know the truth about what's happening in the city. We need your help, Jun-ho said, trying to convey sincerity. Why should I trust you? Hae-jin replied, her voice firm. You have no idea what you're asking. This is not a game. People get hurt, often, to survive. We need to understand what's at stake, Ji-seok intervened. Corruption is on the rise, and innocent people are being crushed. If you can help us uncover what's going on, we might be able to do something about it. Hae-jin studied the two for a long moment. The tension at the table was palpable. Finally, she took a deep breath and said, "Okay, but know that entering this world is not easy. Once you're in, there's no turning back." "We're ready," Junho asserted, determination resonating in his words. With a slight nod, Hae-jin leaned back in her chair. "Then let's talk. The night is still young, and what I have to say could change everything." And so, as the shadows danced around them, Junho felt that the truth was finally within reach. But as they ventured deeper into this dark world, the line between right and wrong began to blur even further. What would be necessary to sacrifice to expose the corruption? And what dark truths were about to be revealed? And so Junho and Ji-seok's journey was just beginning, as they delved into a world filled with dangers, secrets, and hidden truths. The tension rose, and every step they took could lead them closer to salvation or destruction. What will Hae-jin reveal, and what sacrifices will they have to make to dismantle the corruption plaguing their city? The answers are closer than they think, but are they ready to face them? If you are as intrigued as we are and want to follow this thrilling saga, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Leave your like to show that you are enjoying this intense story, and share it with friends who also love engaging narratives. We want to hear from you. Leave your opinion in the comments, telling us where you are watching from and what you thought of the video. Your participation is very important to us. And don't leave just yet. On the screen, you will see a link to our next video, which promises to be even more exciting and revealing. Click and come discover what's coming up. Until next time, and remember, the truth may be closer than you think.